warm welcome to You and Your Business with me, Alec Drew, on Dublin City FM 103.2. Each week we have an expert from the world of business sharing their knowledge, insights and tips to help you reduce costs, increase profits and drive efficiencies. If there's a topic you'd like covered, or if you feel you can make a contribution, please email me at yourbusiness@dublincityfm.ie and perhaps we'll be here one day chatting soon. Today's guest is a chartered accountant with over 25 years' experience. He is a board member of the British-Irish Trade Alliance, and he's also on the board of the British-Irish Chamber and on the Brexit subcommittee, which is very, very relevant. I'm delighted, and a warm welcome to Aidan Scollard from Roberts Nathan to You and Your Business studio.
Thank you very much, Alec.
We couldn't but talk about Brexit based on the week that's just been going on, and I know you have a particular interest in this area and have been working on it for years. Let me just talk about Roberts Nathan and their initiative. They have a thing called the Open Ireland Initiative. Take me through that. Give us our listeners a brief insight to that.
Yeah, so our Open Ireland Initiative is principally aimed towards UK companies that are looking, I suppose, to Brexit-proof themselves. We've been involved in many Irish businesses active in the UK and also UK businesses looking at Ireland. And over the last while, we found that, I suppose, a Brexit proofing or a solution for UK businesses are looking at having some sort of Irish base going forward. It's, I suppose, a very prudent option for them at the moment, and to see as to whether maybe a base in the EU is the way forward for them, and to, I suppose, preserve their profits and to preserve their activities going forward.
So really this is a sort of joint strategy that companies on either side of this potential new border should be looking at and embracing now, because obviously the time for sitting around and thinking about it is virtually over.
Yes, absolutely. What we see is there are benefits on both sides for both jurisdictions. So we help Irish companies in looking at maybe expanding into the UK or having a base because they maybe have a requirement to supply into a manufacturer or part of a supply chain in the UK. But likewise, UK companies that are very active across Europe will find that they may be precluded in certain areas, and therefore having a base in Ireland is very preferable to them. It also means that as they expand, they will of course need local Irish services, and they will need to partner with Irish companies. So I think there's a lot of opportunities for Irish companies as well over the next while.
Yes, there's been a lot of negativity talked about Brexit, but people tend to forget there are opportunities whatever way this sort of pans out.
Yeah, I suppose business always thrives on change, and business always has to look for the opportunities from those changes as they arise. With UK companies looking to come into Ireland and to maybe have their base for Europe or EMEA here, there are plenty of opportunities obviously for employment for Irish people, but also for the Irish companies that they need to assist them going forward. And it's probably not just accountants that are useful for that.
It's great. So how sort of is your sector helping companies like that either come into Ireland or go the opposite way?
Well, I suppose for UK companies looking to come into Ireland, we would regularly meet with UK businesses, and we're part of an international network of accountants, MGI, and we would work with our sister firms across the UK. So say, for instance, next week I'm in London next Wednesday and Thursday, and one of those is to meet with a UK charity that's potentially looking at expanding some of its activities into Ireland because it receives EU funding, and it's concerned going forward that if it doesn't have an EU base, it may be precluded from that funding over time.
Wow, and these are the sort of side issues that I think a lot of people are just not aware of. Talk a bit more about the sort of charitable status of companies and what they need to do now if they're listening. Or
well, yes, I mean, obviously there's a requirement to register here with the revenue, and we often help those charities to incorporate as limited companies to register with Companies Registration Office and with the Charities Regulatory Authority. So I suppose that sector is becoming more prone to more compliance going forward, and we can assist in a number of those areas, including, say, in this case where maybe they're coming in looking to structure for the first time within Ireland.
Right, and are the structures quite dissimilar to what's in the UK?
No, it's probably very similar. The UK has a Charities Commission, whereas we have Charities Regulatory Authority, and that's part of, I suppose, the attraction of Ireland to a lot of UK businesses. Our tastes are very similar, but also our common law is the same. The incorporation of a company and the structure around how it registers for tax, they can understand that, and it's very similar to their primary base back in the UK. If you see a UK client, or indeed an Irish client, going into somewhere like Germany or in France, if you've ever seen a payroll slip in France, you'll understand all the social welfare deductions. It's quite a maze. Whereas to explain that to a UK business coming into Ireland, they understand how PAYE works, they understand year-end returns, because we've both come from a very similar base.
Right, so it makes it easier. But really what you're identifying for them is the potential for added cost to their base, not just setting up, but then the continual maintenance of that as they go forward.
Yes, I think that's probably where a lot of businesses, even in the UK, have sort of kicked the can down the road to now, because they didn't want to commit to a cost which they saw maybe wouldn't be needed over time, in that Brexit would somehow go away or evaporate. It's the human condition, I suppose, to wait until you absolutely have to do something. But we're seeing a step up in inquiries over the last few months, and indeed I'm expecting more over the next few weeks, depending upon how things progress. But this also applies for Irish companies looking into the UK. Although there will be tariffs applying, and that maybe affects some industries more than others, say the food industry, where they're supplying into the UK. The issues that we would see in speaking with a number of clients are maybe not around the tariffs, but around the logistics of moving goods. If you are a food supplier and you're supplying to one of the major UK chains, you'll probably have 4 or 5 distribution centres that you must land your goods in within a small window. If the truck gets stuck at the docks and you miss your window, the truck will go circling for the day. So there's very real issues around the ability for the driver to run out of hours. The number of loads will be compromised. And indeed, if it's perishable goods, you'll have issues in delivery and quality over time. So there are probably solutions on a similar basis that Irish companies should be looking at in the UK. Maybe it's in having a distribution base in the UK. Maybe it's in having a final finishing operation in the UK. If they're supplying into certain industries which maybe work on a just-in-time basis, then if you're supplying, I don't know, gearboxes or dashboards into Jaguar or somebody like that, they don't carry very large stocks. So therefore, you need to arrive and deliver on time. So I can see that people are getting caught up or discussing quite a lot around tariffs and the percentages that it may add to their cost. But in general, the tariff rates, barring some of the food areas, will be fairly small. It's the logistical and operational difficulties it will cause to your business over time that you really need to look at now.
And I was talking to somebody from DHL who was just talking about from the logistics side. There is a cost, of course, in having to put these tariff codes on every product and then ship them, and all of the things that go with that.
Yes, I suppose we would see as well in a number of clients, historically they may have had the in-house expertise around customs documentation, but because we haven't needed that for so long, that's probably a generation before. Right. So therefore, to get people upskilled and for them to understand how customs documentation works to what would be a third country is quite a learning curve, and it does add expense. It does add potentially additional people within the supply chain, and therefore that really has to force its way all the way through to the ultimate cost.
Well, there's so much there going on that I don't think a lot of businesses are quite familiar with yet, but it's going to be a reality sooner or later. We just don't know how it's going to pan out.
Yeah, I think for very large corporates, they've had Brexit planning in place. For other companies, they will effectively get pulled along in the fact of their supply into some of those large companies, or how they are affected in the supply chain. But as I've mentioned before, a lot of people are probably have been waiting rather than incur an expense for their company of something that maybe they would need to set up, where we would suggest that maybe they should have, say, a UK subsidiary company, or indeed coming the other way, where UK companies should set up an Irish subsidiary. To get somebody convinced of that and to actually press the button and start to incur costs around the incorporation and having a base or a real presence, companies have felt up to now historically that maybe it will all somehow go away or there will be a last minute change. But the events this week have shown that a real crash out could be on the cards.
Wow. Just if you're joining us now, we're listening to me, Alec Drew, on Dublin City FM 103.2 and You and Your Business, where my studio guest is Aidan Scollard from Roberts Nathan, and we're talking about that topical subject which you all love, Brexit, but just more in a factual way and how it's affecting the everyday business person out there. I suppose from your point of view, always stocks and holding stock is a huge cost to business. So as you identified, JIT, or just in time, poses a real challenge now for companies, just from even that financial side of it.
Yes, for some companies, it will cause a real working capital additional requirement, in that if they are to have some sort of stock holding, say if they're supplying into the UK where they should have additional stock held in the UK, then that's a real investment that they need to include in their cash flow, and it's a real cost that they will bear over time, especially if in turn to invest in that additional stock they have to maybe increase borrowings or look as to how they structure their company going forward. I mean, the thing that I would say to a lot of companies on both sides, whether it's a UK company or an Irish company, is although Brexit is coming in whatever form that is at the end, geography is not changing. The likelihood is if you are supplying into the UK, you will continue to do so, maybe in a different format and maybe in a different volume going forward. But it's not a market that Irish companies are going to completely ignore. There's a 69 million population in the UK. They have very similar tastes to us. They speak the same language. The packaging is exactly the same. So therefore, for a lot of industries, the ability to continue and the want to continue to supply is still going to be very strong. So I don't see a lot of that changing. The issues at the moment for them is we are in a state of unknown or no man's land, and it's very difficult for anyone to plan if you've got so many different scenarios or so many different options. But you do need to look at sort of the options and as to how it affects different parts of your business. Obviously, foreign currency is a big risk at the moment, having had stability for such a long period of time. There has been some volatility, not much this week, which is unexpected, but it may come over the next few weeks. So again, we would say to clients, if they're supplying into the UK and vice versa, UK clients coming into Ireland, if you're exposed to the other currency, your business is whatever you sell. So if you sell chickens into the UK, or you sell some other product going either way, or a service, you need to hedge your foreign currency and be happy with that. If you wanted to be a foreign currency dealer, you would have trained to do that in the first place.
Exactly. And I think that's a very valuable lesson that you're identifying there. So many people in business get distracted by hedging in foreign currency without the consideration, or else not hedging and not locking in either profits or losses, whatever is going to happen. I think what you've identified a number of serious challenges that certainly Brexit is presenting to Irish business people. One of the things, quite obviously, is not sitting on your thumb. That is not a solution to it. But what sort of time is needed to sort of make plans now? Because we're so close to it. If I was starting this Monday coming, what is my timescale to set up my operation, to start looking for the finance to maybe stockpile various products and things like that?
Well, I mean, the initial structuring and the setup of an entity in either jurisdiction is a very short process. That can be done in a number of weeks to register a company and get the tax registration piece. It's more around the longer term planning as to whether you need to approach your financial institution for additional financing, how you're going to deal with your staffing, how you're going to deal with logistics going forward. I suppose a lot of that will depend as to likely timing around Brexit. As everyone knows, Article 50 expires at 29th of March. So on a crash out scenario, all would change the next day. The likelihood of that being extended or changed in some way, I think is highly likely, because just a lot of companies will not logistically be able to be ready within that period of time. So we have a proposed transition period. In the event of the deal having been accepted this week, there would have been a transition period as the end of 2020. And I think to a certain degree, that's what people were relying on, is that although there was a date there of the end of March, the reality was, this won't happen till the end of 2020, so I can kick out my decision making, I can kick out any major changes until then. I think what's concentrated people's minds on this week is that the end of March could be very real, and therefore, maybe this transition period won't be as long, or the activities or changes that it would have in their business would be much more dramatic, much more quickly than they expected.
Yes, and I mean, we've talked about the food industry and just in time in terms of various goods, but also I think we were chatting earlier and you mentioned something like universities. It has an impact on them as well.
Yes, when you dig deeper into a lot of sectors, you realise as to how reliant or interlinked we are. I would have had a number of clients before, universities and third level colleges, who would have been receiving EU funding grants, and a lot of those would have been in partnership with, say, other universities, either across Europe or across the UK. So again, I would have seen some of those clients starting to look towards maybe migrating towards Spanish or French universities being their co-partner rather than a UK university, because they were concerned that in the future it would affect their funding requirements or their ability to get funding from the EU. So again, once you sort of pick away at various sectors, you start to realise how much Brexit affects things that you would otherwise not have considered at all.
And is there a likelihood that the fact that whatever they've negotiated as being part of the EU in terms of funding, they may have to resubmit under, say, if they move into Ireland or have some sort of thing? How's that going to work?
Well, I suppose, again, the UK government, in order to sort of allay some of the fears of their universities, had said that they would continue the funding up to a period of time. So they'd effectively subvent for the EU in the intervening period, especially up to the end of 2020. But I think on a longer term planning basis, this was where some of the Irish universities were coming from, is that some of these funding programs run for maybe 3 or 5 years. Yeah. So if you're starting to apply for funding now, you could potentially be in a very different scenario by the time a lot of the funding comes through. And I suppose they were concerned that if they picked the wrong partner, they could rule themselves out of the funds completely.
Right. Wow, it's such a can of worms. It just keeps opening up and giving more and more.
It's the gift that keeps on giving.
Doesn't it just? If I was to ask you to maybe give a couple of tips for business people out there around Brexit, just give them some starting points. What should you be doing now, based on where we are and what we know now, and you haven't done anything? What should you be doing now?
Well, I think Enterprise Ireland have a very good Brexit scorecard that I would recommend anyone to look at, and that identifies the areas of risk. So I suppose the old adage of prepare for the worst and plan for the best is where it comes from. So people should complete that scorecard, see as to where the risks are within their business. If currently, especially they have a foreign exchange risk, that's one that they should mitigate and close very quickly by hedging going forward, because I think there will be volatility over the next while. The issue around the currency is it's probably very much driven by how the markets feel, and therefore that's probably depending upon what you read in the newspaper the next day, which is reliant upon the politics of the moment. So, you can realise that there are certain areas that you can control, and there are some items you cannot control. Foreign exchange will be outside of your control, but the parts of your business that you can control and where you identify the risks from completing the scorecard or something similar, or having a discussion with somebody around analysing your business and where its risks are, they're the parts that you can control, and you should get to grips with those very quickly.
And that means building it into some form of strategic plan, or building it into your existing strategic plan and getting to work immediately. I mean, you mentioned hedging there, and just from limited bank experience, that poses a problem in just itself, because banks just won't suddenly lock in a lot of currency for you without you having some form of security based around it. So it won't happen overnight.
No, it won't. And if you haven't spoken with your bank, you would need to get to that very quickly. They need to understand how your business works, to understand what your foreign currency exposure is. And they may also need to obviously look at your accounts and balance sheet to see as to what risk they are taking on, because for them, yes, it's a risk versus reward. You're going to pay a cost in getting some lock-in on your currency at this point, but the bank needs to understand that it will ultimately get paid back.
And this also builds into stockpiling of goods, or having to maybe set up some sort of depot for distribution where you're now holding more stock. Again, it means talking to the bank and convincing them. My understanding is that you just don't get decisions overnight as you did, before the giant financial crisis.
Yes, the worst thing for most clients these days is what I would call the slow no.
The slow no.
You really need to go into the bank very well prepared. You need to be showing them your projections, what your cash flow is like, so that they can understand that you can repay them. If you have an increased working capital requirements because you're going to invest in stock, or you're going to invest in some new warehousing or some sort of longer capital cycle, again, the bank need to understand that before it happens. You shouldn't start off on a track on the expectation that the bank will automatically support and that you will present them with a fait accompli. It may come to a point where they just won't support, or if they don't understand what you're doing, you will frighten them, and that's not a good situation to be in with your bank.
Banks don't like to be frightened. No. They like their expectations managed. And I suppose really what you're saying here is that you need to be talking to your accountants now, not to be kicking it down the line. You will have a cost around preparation, which may never come to fruition, but it's better to have a plan in place than nothing at all.
Yes, absolutely. Planning is the key. And in this, it's planning around the various scenarios that may happen. Nobody's going to be able to guarantee exactly as to how the future is going to work out and what Brexit will look like. But at this point, you should be looking at where your risks are, look at the various scenarios and what impacts that's likely to have in your business. If you're making a conscious decision then to invest in, say, additional stock holding or a longer capital cycle, then you need to understand what that cost is and how it's financed. And when you get to that, then you need to have a realistic business plan. And as you're saying, that's part of your strategy going forward. Your strategy will more likely need amending, as it always does, because it never just sits in the drawer. So what is your strategy to deal with Brexit over the next while?
And it suggests also, particularly if you're requiring bank assistance to help you do this, if everybody's leaving to last minute, there will be a stampede looking for this sort of funding, which means that will delay the process even further.
Yes, I mean, any of these institutions, I think in the same way that the Minister for Finance has made it clear to, say, UK companies looking at Ireland, that on the financial services side, if they think they're going to come into the central bank and have a very short process, I think the latest one is that he's asked for at least a 4-month notice of anyone who wants to apply for a licence coming into Ireland. All these things take time. They will be well outside the March window at this point, but I think that will move in some way. But you're right, human nature, as I said, is to leave things till the last minute. But if everybody's charging for the door at the same time, the banks will deal with clients who are more prepared and who are more realistic in what they want.
Right. If you're just tuning in, you're listening to me, Alec Drew, on Dublin City 103.2, where my studio guest is Aidan Scollard from Roberts Nathan. We've been talking about the controversial subject of Brexit and all of the planning that you should be looking at putting in place, and not just leaving it till the last minute. Have you any other tips that you'd like to suggest around Brexit?
I suppose it's a good learning exercise for a lot of people, maybe to look at their businesses more in depth than they have over the last while. People have come out of a significant recession, and I suppose any businesses that have survived to this point have learned a lot of lessons along the way. I think the next lesson is in how you plan and strategize going forward, and also in getting the right team around you, whether it is advice from accountants or logistics providers, or indeed the state agencies that can provide much advice. Enterprise Ireland are helping a lot of Irish companies on the outbound experience, and obviously for the inbound experience there's the IDA, but there's also UK state agencies. The British Embassy here in Dublin has the Department of International Trade that help companies going both ways, and there are a lot of state agencies that can also assist, and a lot of those work in conjunction with each other, so it's not an either or. So I think people should look at the assistance that they can get out there. Knowledge is king at this point, so I think talking to as many people as possible, but then action is what needs to happen very quickly for business owners.
Yeah, it's an opportunity realistically for a lot of companies that don't have a strategic plan in place, is maybe to put the bones of one and maybe bring in a consultant or talk to your accountants. Just, I suppose, in the couple of minutes that we've got left, I'd just like to move away from Brexit for a couple of minutes and just talk. Most people tend to forget that there are a lot of accountancy practices out there, but don't understand so many of them have niche business models. Tell me about your own. I understand that Roberts Nathan have three in particular: hotels, charity and property. Maybe you might give me a quick overview about that.
Yes, well, I suppose hotels have developed quite a lot over the last while. I mean, in the recession, it was a significantly impacted industry, but as has been seen over the last while, the demand for hotel spaces, especially in Dublin, has increased dramatically. We've seen an increase in clients who are investing in hotels. We've seen an increase in results from those clients. The revenue per room and also the occupancy rates are increasing dramatically. Now, there is probably an undersupply at the moment, but there will be supply coming online over the next while. So again, it's, I suppose, that balancing act. Brexit, sorry to bring that back again, also has an impact there.
Yes, of course.
As there's a reduction in UK visitors, but it seems to have been more than compensated for in visitors, especially from North America. So that's a sector that has sort of bounced back quite dramatically over the last 4 to 5 years. On the charity side, again, that's a sector that's probably seen a huge change in regulation coming at it because of various issues that have arisen within that sector over the last while. I think there will be a more active charities regulator going forward. It may lead to maybe a lesser number of charities. We have a huge number of charities. If you have a look at the revenue website, you'll see the list of registered charities is huge for the population that we have, because historically it has been not reasonably easy, but it has been a common purpose for people to set those up. Yeah. I think over time we might see some of the ones that have a very similar ethos starting to merge.
Sort of consolidation of some sort.
Yes, yeah. So I think that's a sector that will have a huge change. The other area then being property. I mean, we see clients back in the property development space. The commercial development has, as you can see from around Dublin anyway, the number of cranes that has taken off quite a pace. There's probably hasn't been the volume so far on the residential side. But there is a demand there, because obviously you can see that with what people are paying in rents and the demand for staff. And again, it's probably also linked with if we're in a new boom, then there's a requirement for housing for people. So I think there are three of the sectors that have, I suppose, a watch on, and they'd be three of the areas that we're very active in at the moment.
Yeah, they certainly, each of them pose the challenge. I mean, I'm looking at hotels. I don't think I can afford to stay in my own city here now. You know, it's really got very expensive, and the occupancy rate, as you've identified, seems to be very, very high.
Yeah, I think that the room rates have increased quite quickly, so it's very visible. But also, if you see, there's quite a lot of expenditure now on hotels. A lot of the high-end hotels are getting significant refurbishments. There's a big refurbishment at the moment in the Shelbourne, and the rates are not cheap there. No. So I think it also points to the fact that there is a return for those. If those large companies are investing in refurbishments, then they realise that there's a return for that. So I don't think we're going to see too much of a softening in rates. That's
fantastic. Listen, if people want to find out more about you, Aidan Scollard from Roberts Nathan, what's the web address they might go on to?
Yeah, our web address is, our website's the best place to get us on, robertsnathan.com. I'm based in the Dublin office, but we've also got an office in Cork. So yeah, you can always link in with us through that, and even if it's just a chat around the Brexit piece, we can always help.
Fantastic. Listen, great talking to Aidan, and that's all we've time for today. A special thanks to our guest Aidan Scollard for coming into the You and Your Business studio today. Thanks also to Darren on sound. Don't forget that you can contact the show by emailing yourbusiness@dublincityfm.ie with your comments and suggestions. The podcast of today's show will be available on dublincityfm.ie from tomorrow.